Good evening, everyone. I'm Andy Murphy with Fox 2 News. Tonight I am the moderator for this debate. So I want to welcome you all here. Thank you for coming. We do have quite a few seats, especially in the front, as people start to come in, and if you're looking for a place to sit. I know the parking may be a little bit of a challenge out there, but we welcome everyone here tonight to the debate on whether to legalize marijuana in Missouri. The goal tonight is to get the information out on both sides of this issue. We want to get this information out in a respectful and professional manner. That is the goal tonight, is to talk about the facts on both sides and to be respectful of our panelists here who are giving up their time to discuss this very important issue. This is an issue that draws strong opinions on each side, and we respect those opinions. But again, I want to stress, please be respectful. Please recognize the professionalism that we have set up tonight in this debate. As we go through the next hour and a half, we have a timekeeper. We're going to make sure this is very fair for both sides to discuss. First, I want to introduce our panelist, John Payne, Executive Director of ShowMeCannabis. Sergeant Jason Grellner, Vice President of the National Narcotics Officers Association Coalition. I want to lay out the ground rules for tonight's debate. We will begin with opening statements from each side. They will each have 10 minutes to talk, and there are question cards that should be passed around. I see those going around right now, where you can write down your questions for John and for Jason. We are going to collect all of those cards after the opening statements. There will be a couple of people from both sides who will go through those questions and select some of those, and at the end of the debate, I will read some of those questions. It is very important that you print clearly on those cards so I can read them. Also, please specify who the question is for. Write that down as well. Again, we will collect those cards after the opening statement, so please make sure you fill those out. I know that we won't get around to all of them, but we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. Also, when you walked in, you may have seen a couple of buckets. They are for donations. One is for the Missouri Narcotics Officers Association, the other is for ShowMeCannabis. And I wanted to point out that both of these gentlemen said half of the proceeds from each of those buckets will go to Harris House, so that you know that. So any donations to either side of this issue, half of it goes to Harris House. All right, we're going to get started. We will begin with Mr. Payne. Your opening statements, please.
Thank you, Andy. I'd just like to first of all thank everyone for coming out, and thank Sergeant Grellner for agreeing to this debate. And I'd like to say that I think Sergeant Grellner is a good and honorable man, and I think a lot of times in our political discourse we tend to think of our opponents as our actual enemies, and you know, I think that's usually incorrect. I disagree with him on this issue, but I think he's a good man, and you know, he is out there and he's dedicated his life to fighting very real problems of drug abuse. However, in this instance, I believe that he has chosen the incorrect tactic for that. In 1990, the free market economist Milton Friedman wrote an open letter to Bill Bennett, who at the time was the drug czar. And they were personal friends, but Milton Friedman thought the drug war was a bad idea that would end up infringing upon our civil liberties and not actually you know, deterring drug use. And so he quoted Oliver Cromwell as such: "I beseech you, in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken." And so I would like to ask Sergeant Grellner to think it possible that your view may be mistaken. Also in this debate, I think we get lost in the fact, in a dispute over whether marijuana is a good or bad thing. I think, like most inanimate objects, it's all about how it's used. It is neither good nor bad, it's all on how it's used. If you're someone who needs marijuana for medicine, If you're a cancer patient who requires it to be able to hold down your food after receiving chemotherapy, I think that's obviously a good thing. But if you're somebody who's kind of wasting their life away playing Xbox and doing nothing but smoking marijuana every day, I think that's a bad thing. So I mean, it has both good and bad properties, and we bring those properties out in the way that we use them. The real question is, should criminal law be brought into this equation? Is this something that the criminal law should deal with? As the Declaration of Independence says, governments are instituted among men to defend our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think arresting somebody for cannabis does none of those things. And in fact, I would argue that it actually destroys those rights in a lot of cases. And it also certainly incurs large costs that have to be borne by Missouri taxpayers. The state of Missouri and its cities and other localities spend $90 million a year on fighting cannabis. That is according to a study that was done by Jeffrey Meyer at Harvard University last year. And we also forego $59 million in tax revenues that we could have if we tax cannabis in a manner similar to alcohol. That totals up to about $149 million. As a point of comparison, we spend $136.4 million in fiscal year 2011 on our entire community college system in the state. So the state of Missouri is spending $13 million more to prohibit cannabis than it is on its community college system. To me, that seems like a misplaced priority. Another way to look at this is the opportunity cost to law enforcement. What are they doing that they could, they're making all these marijuana arrests, what could they be doing otherwise if they weren't doing that? So in 2011, there were 18,818 arrests made for the possession of marijuana, 1,823 for the sale or manufacture of marijuana, and all other drugs combined, 15,905. That means that they're making 30% more arrests for marijuana than for all the other drugs combined. So methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, all those, there are 5,000 fewer arrests than for marijuana. And I think we would all agree that those drugs are more dangerous than marijuana. So why are there 30% more arrests for marijuana? Again, I think this is a misplaced priority. And then we can also look at the clearance rates for other crimes. Clearance rate is when the police have made an arrest and the prosecutor has brought charges for a crime. So that means that someone has committed a crime and they've been arrested and charged for it. Now, in 2011, there were 26,852 violent crimes committed in the state of Missouri. The clearance rate was 50.8%. That means that 49.2% of cases, there was not an arrest made or charges were never brought. That's for violent crime. Now you talk about property crime, the rate is even lower. It's 20.6%. So in 80% of cases nearly, an arrest is never made and charges are never brought. So let's say someone steals your car. There is about a 1 in 8 chance that someone will actually be arrested and charged for that crime. Now, it seemed to me that it would be better for the police to be out pursuing robberies, car thefts, rapes, murders, that sort of thing, than to be arresting people for the possession of marijuana. I think any arrest for possession of marijuana, when some of these cases aren't cleared, seems to me a waste. Now, that's all a little abstract. That's a lot of numbers, sometimes you need to think about it in terms of individual human people. And I think if we look at the case of Jeff Mazansky and Ronald Wayne Greer, I think that illustrates it nicely. So Jeff Mazansky is a guy from Pettis County, from Sedalia, and he is currently serving life without parole for a marijuana charge. He had prior offenses, and so when he was caught up in a conspiracy charge, the guy he was with had 4 pounds. He did not actually have any on him, but he was caught up in the conspiracy to distribute, and he was sentenced to life in prison under our prior and persistent drug offender laws. And when you're sentenced under those laws, there is no possibility of parole. And so he's been in prison since the early 90s, 20 years now. Now, around the same time, a guy named Ronald Wayne Greer was convicted of attempted rape in Pettis County. And he was eventually let out in the latter part of this last decade. And shortly thereafter, he reoffended. He raped somebody near Katy Trail. And when he was being taken back to prison, he assaulted one of the officers, overpowered him, and took control of the vehicle and set up a 4-county manhunt. Now, it seems to me that you would be better off if Ronald Wayne Greer had received the life without parole sentence the first time that he could try to commit rape, as opposed to the second time, and a guy like Jeff Mazansky, who has never committed any violence, should be the one who was let out early. But again, that's sort of priority, out-of-whack priorities that are created by cannabis prohibition. But perhaps most important of all, cannabis prohibition does not actually achieve the goals that it is set out to achieve. It is designed, presumably, to stop people from using cannabis. But there appears to be no relationship between the amount of arrests for marijuana and the use of cannabis. So, for instance, the greatest increase in the arrest rate for marijuana occurred during the 1990s. Beginning in 1992, police made 131 arrests per 100,000 people in the country. By 1998, there were making 250 arrests per 100,000 population, or about 700,000 arrests every year for possession of marijuana nationwide. Now, this does not seem to have the intended impact on any important metric, such as price, potency, or use rates. According to the Office of National Drug Control Policy, the price of cannabis per gram declined by 16% from 1990 to 2000. The average potency of cannabis increased by 53% over the same time span. And past year use increased from 7.9% in 1992 to 11% in 2002. So despite all the new arrests, the price decreased, potency increased, and more people were using it. That does not sound like a successful policy. Moreover, the people who were most likely to be using it were teenagers. So the people that we are most interested in keeping from using it are people that were most likely to be using it under this policy. Among high school seniors, use nearly doubled in the 1990s to about 40% from 40% in the past year and 20% in the past month. That brings me to my next point, that the most vulnerable groups are the ones who are least likely to be deterred by prohibition. Teenagers do not think about long-term consequences. In fact, that's one of their defining characteristics. It's one of the reasons we don't let them make a lot of decisions, because they're not capable of really thinking about the long term. And so they're not going to understand the full ramifications of a policy that can cause them to be arrested, to lose financial aid, to go to college, and to have a lifetime criminal record. Those ramifications don't sink in on them because their minds are not really fully capable of processing them. And so they're the least likely to be deterred by a criminal penalty. And I think that's reflected in the fact that teenagers are 3 times more likely to use cannabis than the adult population. So there's a past month use rate of 22.9% for teenagers compared to 7% for adults. Oh, I'm sure I'm timing already. All right. Now, I don't think that we can solve all these problems, but I do think that if we take this out of the criminal market, if we legalize, regulate, and tax cannabis, then we can ameliorate those problems to a large degree. We've had a great deal of success in battling the harms of alcohol without ever having to arrest somebody purely for the consumption of it. We are better able to enforce DUI laws because of the fact that we focus on that, not the actual drinking itself. So traffic fatalities from drunk driving have declined by more than 60% since 1982, from over 25,000 to 9,878 in 2011. And the 2013 data that we have so far indicates that is continuing. 40% of the population smoked cigarettes in the 1960s, but by 2008 it was only 21%. 17.1% of high school seniors now smoke cigarettes in 2011, so that's actually lower than the 22.9% who use cannabis, and that's despite the fact that cigarettes are legal for many high school seniors. So clearly we're having more success with legal regulated products than we are with cannabis, so I think that's the direction we should move with marijuana.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Right down, just in case. I wanted to make sure we had those before Jason got started. Okay, so now, Sergeant Grellner, your 10 minutes for opening statements.
Thank you, and again, I'd like to echo what John said. Welcome you all here this evening. Thank you for coming out for this important information. And like John said, we're hoping for a very professional debate. I respect John. I respect John's views. It's a great opening statement. If I could agree with all that, the debate would be over, but then we'd both be wrong. So I'll go on with my side. In listening to John, I've listened to John. We've talked on the radio, we've talked on television in the past. When you say marijuana is not bad, compared to what? Marijuana today is not the marijuana of the 1960s and 1970s. The THC going through the roof. The THC levels back in the 1960s and 1970s are around 1 to 2%. Now we're seeing regular street THC levels 11%. spiking at 20%. You know, just on the internet today, I was offered my undercover status 18 and 32% THC levels in marijuana. So this is not the same drug. This is a harmful drug. And you know, the debate about medicine is a completely different debate. When you talk about marijuana as medicine, we need to talk about the FDA. We need to talk about scientific research and scientific studies and how we go about, in this country, regulating medicine. That's for another night. I think that's a completely different issue. You know, he brings up life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, life and liberty come up twice. They come up once in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and they come up once in the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment under life, liberty, and protection of property and person, so that the government won't be infringing on those rights. But in each one of those, liberty is not alone. In fact, liberty is second to life. And this debate is about health. It's about the health of this country, and it's about the health of our youth. And saying that prohibition doesn't work or prohibition has failed is not right. Now, the highest time of drug use in this country was around 1974, when drug use in this country was almost 15% of the population. Drug use dropped during the Reagan era in the Just Say No campaign to 6.8%. That's a 50% drop, an over 50% drop in a disease state. Imagine, if you will, if 50% of all cancer was gone today. 50% of HIV/AIDS was gone today. The parades that there would be, the Nobel Peace Prizes that would have been won, and the media blitz that there would be regarding those drops in that disease. Drug abuse is a disease. I know that because I work in that community. John doesn't. John's a policy guy. I get that. We need policy guys. But we need policy guys that are well-rounded and work in the community, that they're directing policy for. Because when bad policy is made, especially in the realm of criminal activity, it's law enforcement that's left to implement bad policy and pick up the pieces and clean up the mess that's left behind. So what I hope we gain from tonight is the fact that if John believes that prohibition isn't the proper thing, and I know that legalization is not the proper thing, why aren't we finding some middle ground? Why aren't we discussing the fact that 440,000 people a year still die from cigarette smoke? Why aren't we discussing the fact that over 80,000 people a year still die from alcohol abuse? Why aren't we discussing the fact that prohibition of all drugs only shows 38,000 people a year dying? Liberty doesn't come before life in any of those three stanzas. Life comes before liberty. And we're here to protect life and health. You know, the fallacy that there'll be more time for law enforcement to do bigger crimes because marijuana will be made legal for recreational use, especially after looking at the bills that they're pushing forward, is ludicrous. The amount of regulations that are in this bill, including regulations about whether marijuana can still come into this state from other states, leave this state, regulations around how much a household exemption limit is, what deters those household limits, where you can sell it at, how close to a school, how close to a college. All of those will still need law enforcement, unless we believe that people that don't follow the law today will suddenly follow the law tomorrow. So we'll still need law enforcement on this issue. And it'll make it much harder for us, because how do I know what marijuana was grown in John Smith's house and what was brought here by the Mexican cartel? And by the way, once these dispensaries or these medical marijuana shops or these marijuana pot shops or cafes open up, who's going to provide the marijuana for those? Right now, who in this country has the largest distributorship and supply? The cartels do. Why is it that we don't believe that the cartels will buy into this to legitimize their business and continue to suck money out of this country to go towards terrorism? And beyond that, once they've sucked money out of this country, Big Tobacco is waiting at the door. Big Tobacco has already bought the trademarks. Big Tobacco has already got the websites. What you're going to see is Big Tobacco come in, lower the price point, which means when the price point goes down, the actual tax revenues that are left behind will go down. So the taxes that won't be where we said they're going to be. The price point will go down. More people will get involved in use, as we've seen with alcohol, as we've seen with cigarettes and those failed policies. And more people will be damaged by it. And we'll be sitting here 20, 30, 40 years from now, debating some other drug legalization because of liberty, and talking about what do we do about marijuana, because the other problem with these referendums is these are constitutional amendments. We're going to constitutionally amend the Missouri Constitution? The only reason we do something like that is so that the legislature can't come in later and improve upon things or make things different. So we're going to take it completely out of the hands of the future by making a constitutional amendment. That doesn't seem right either. Prohibition does work. Again, as you see in the number of people dying from drugs that are already regulated, alcohol, tobacco, and how about prescription drug abuse? That kills approximately 14,000 people a year. One of the most regulated industries we have, regulated from the minute the chemical comes into this country, to the production, to the prescribing, and then to the dispensing. And yet 14,000 people a year die from it. Under prohibition, as people like to say, nobody dies from marijuana. So why don't we talk about the real problem, are the drugs that are killing people. Alcohol, tobacco, prescription drug abuse. When you talk about why are there such high rates of arrest for marijuana, it's the most widely abused drug behind alcohol. When you look in 2008 percentages, it's 4 times as much as pain relievers, 4 times as much as cocaine, 10 times as much as tranquilizers, hallucinogens, stimulants, 20 times as much as heroin and inhalants. Of course you're going to arrest more people for marijuana. It's the prevailing drug of problem. So of course you're going to see 30% increases in arrests. You think that each day I tell my people to go out and find marijuana? Or do you think that people and police officers who are making arrests for other crimes stumble upon marijuana in people's pockets because it is so prevalent as an illegal drug? And who do you think commits these violent acts that we talk about here? Because when I talk to law enforcement across this state and in big cities and in rural areas, and we talk about who's committing crimes, it's those suffering from the disease of addiction. And what we really need to be talking about is how we better serve those individuals when they get into the legal system. Because many of them find their way into our drug court system through arrest. And they find their life in sobriety through the legal system. And we need to have a better way of encompassing more people that find their way to a life of rehabilitation and sober living through those sorts of things. Because we have spent a lot of money on law enforcement, and we need to spend a lot more money on prevention and rehabilitation, because this is a discussion about health. Thank you.
Now we're going to collect those cards that have your questions on them. So if you would, raise your hands up and we will collect them. You could even pass them to the middle is probably the best idea. Pass those cards to the middle. They will be collected. Anyone standing in the back, there are seats here in the front on both sides if you would like to sit. We're going to collect all of those cards again, and then we will have 2 representatives on both sides who will go through those cards, and we will pick some of those and ask those toward the end of our discussion. Again, there are seats on either side of the aisle if you would like to have a seat. It does not matter where you sit. It does not make a statement. So you can sit wherever you want in this room tonight. That is not, there is no either or. It's all in one room where we are discussing both sides tonight. Continue to pass over those cards. This will be the only time that we take those cards because we want to get a chance to go through those. Anyone left, you can raise those up. We have someone over here on this side. Please pass those cards to the center and we will take them. Anyone else? A couple more in the middle, and I think we're in good shape. All right, each side had 10 minutes for their opening statements. Now each will have 5 minutes to kind of cross-examine what the other one said. And John, we'll start with you. You heard Sergeant Grellner's opening statements. What do you have to say?
A number of things. So first is, you referred to disease as an addiction, or an addiction as a disease, and I think you're correct in saying that, but if addiction is a disease, then why are we arresting sick people?
Because sick people, and that's a great question, why are we arresting sick people? Because, I was once told by a person in rehabilitation that if 100 people decided on a Friday night that they were addicted and they had a problem, and that they were going to go to rehabilitation on Monday morning at the rehabilitation center, out of those 100 people, about 26 people would show up. And by the end of the first week, there'd be less than 10 of them left in the rehab program because they weren't forced to be there. This is part of what they wanted to do for themselves. And by the end of the second week, that number would have dropped to about 5 people would still be in the program. And by the end of the program, those that would make it through the full course of 90-day program, there'd be about half of one person there. And out of that, so about 0.5% would be there. And out of that, less than a quarter of half would still be clean in 2 years. So what we do know now, we always thought that you had to hit rock bottom. Everybody had to find their bottom before they would go into rehabilitation and do well. Drug court proved that wrong. Drug court proves that we can help you rehabilitate. How do people find their way into drug court programs and programs that help them to rehabilitate? Through arrest. And what happens with arrest? The public wants two things. The public wants you to pay for your crime, and the public wants you not to reoffend. So how do we stop people with drug abuse problems from reoffending? We help them to get into a sober lifestyle.
What is the success rate for drug courts? Success
rate, well, it's much better than the 77% or higher recidivism rate that we have. When drug courts first started, they had success rates well above 70%. To tell you the truth, at the current time, I don't know what those success rates are, but what I can tell you from my own experience, because I'm a member of the drug court team, is that what we're seeing is that we're being forced in the drug court community to take on the more hardened individuals with many years of drug psychosis and drug problems. But what I can tell you, because I sit in on the reviews of these individuals, and I get to talk to these individuals, and I get to be in programs with these individuals, that almost to every man and woman in the program started their ladder of addiction in the early stages of life between 8 and 14 years old with marijuana and alcohol.
Don't disagree with that, that most people start out with alcohol. That is actually what the research shows. Which brings me to my next point. You say prohibition works. Simple yes or no question here. Would you return to alcohol prohibition then?
So simple yes or no. So have I stopped beating my wife? Really, is that what we're going to go with? Simple yes or no. Didn't know I was in court. Yeah. Have I stopped beating my wife? I don't know, John. Have I stopped beating my wife? No, that's not a simple answer.
Oh, but it is you say that we have some
what I said was, we do
I think it's, and I agree with that, but if prohibition is the approach that works, then why not apply it across the board?
I said prohibition works in this instance and has been working. And here's why. You said 7% of adults use it. It means 93% of adults don't use. 21% of adolescents use it. It means 79% don't use. So how does it not work?
Well, if there's over 100 million people who have at some point used in their lives and 19 million who currently use, it seems like you can't arrest 19 million people, you can't arrest 100 million people, and any policy that makes a third of Americans, well actually more like 40% of Americans, a criminal would seem to be a problem, would it not?
No, but we can also find, again, common ground where we can sit down and talk about how we attend to these people once they get into the system. I'm not saying that, somewhere down the road we don't need to talk about, you've got expungement throughout the latter part of all of the bills that you've brought forward.
Indeed, and I believe you referred to that as one of the most worst parts of it. Now, one question I also have is that, before marijuana prohibition was enacted, there was a vanishingly small portion of the population that used cannabis in a recreational way anyway. So how is it that a policy that's successful has seen an explosion in use rates such that nearly half the population has used cannabis, whereas in a country like the Netherlands, where it's officially been tolerated, or unofficially been tolerated for the past 40 years, they have lifetime usage rates half of what we have?
Well, first off, I don't know that those studies are correct. and I don't know the studies that you're talking to. And
I can email them to you if you like.
That'd be great. Again, I go back to what we're looking at right now today. You want to go back 100 years or 200 years, obviously the population of the United States was much smaller. We didn't have the social networks that we have. We didn't have the ability to get around the transportation issues that we have now. So you're talking
Sergeant Grellner, I'll step in. That's where our 5 minutes ends for that, but we're going to start off with you, starting your cross-examination, and your 5 minutes begins now.
And thank you. John, going forward, you know, throughout the bill, you talk about how we are going to keep, if this becomes a legal product for recreational use, that we want to prevent it from getting into the hands of children. How are you going to do that?
I think pretty much the same way we do it with alcohol and tobacco right now. I'll tell you this. You know, I was in high school myself, and it was a lot easier to get marijuana than it was to get alcohol and tobacco. The simple fact of the matter is that I could get it at school. I rarely had to leave to buy it. And you know what? Most of the people I was buying it from were people that were at school with me. So not only does prohibition provide the incentive, provide the access to kids, it also encourages kids to become dealers, because it's a lot easier to make a few $100s flipping quarter pounds at the high school than it is to flipping quarter pounders at McDonald's.
I see. So you're saying in your high school it was easier to get marijuana than alcohol, but in a 30-day study in Missouri from 2012, students responded from middle school through high school that alcohol was 16.9%, marijuana was 8.6%. So you're saying what we can look forward to in Missouri is a doubling of our marijuana use to meet alcohol, because we want to treat it like alcohol.
I'm not familiar with that study, but I will tell you the monitoring.
I can email it.
That's fine.
Actually, I think I can hand it to you. I've got it here on the table. It's a line of things for the future.
Well, no, that's not a Missouri study, then. That's a nationwide survey. But Monitoring the Future survey has consistently shown for several years that marijuana is more accessible to high school seniors than it is to than alcohol is.
And what do you say about studies that have shown in states with just medical marijuana, the fallacy of medical marijuana, smoked cannabis, that rates in those states are higher than any other states?
Well, I would respond with a study by Daniel Rees at the University of Colorado, Denver, that looked specifically, quote, specifically examined the relationship between legalization of marijuana use at school, this is legalization of medical marijuana, whether the teen was offered drugs on school property and alcohol and cocaine use. The results provided no evidence that medical marijuana legalization led to increases in pot use at school, the likelihood of being offered drugs at school, or the use of other harmful substances. The researchers also looked closely at state surveys of youth risk behavior and didn't find such evidence. And now that's a study that holds constant for other variables, so it's not just a simple correlation study. Because they have found that in states that have higher marijuana use than other states, they tend to have laxer laws, which isn't a surprise. But the causality is running in that direction, not the direction of the laxer laws cause greater use.
Really, so the perception of harm in those states is not lower to the youth, because what we do know equivocally is that as perception of harm goes down, use goes up. And so by legalizing something, most people then believe that it's safe. And when people begin to believe that things are safe, especially children, as we've seen with the increase in prescription drug abuse, because it comes from a doctor and it comes from a pharmacist, it must be safe, the use will increase. And how can you say that if mom and dad are growing marijuana in the house, that youth won't be drawn to using marijuana?
I would say that if legalization purely equates to people perceiving it as safe, then how is it that perceptions of safety of cigarettes have gone down dramatically? Very few people think that cigarettes are safe anymore, teenagers included, and that's one of the things that has driven use rates down.
And that's a perfect example. You're exactly right. And the reason is because we have worked hard and put money from the tobacco industry into education and prevention, which we're not putting into these programs at the current time.
Well, might be able to do that for marijuana. So, I think that's exactly the.
So you want to use money from taxing marijuana to pay for the problems that marijuana is going to cause, and put it back into prevention to prevent people from using the marijuana that we're going to legalize.
The problems that are already there. The problems aren't going to be created by legalization. The problem already exists. 40% of the youth is already using cannabis right now.
40%. A minute ago it was 20%.
Well, 20% is the monthly use rate, 40% is the yearly use rate.
40% is the lifetime, not yearly. It was, have they tried it in their lifetime? The 30-day period gives you a better look at who's actually using because it's in the last 30 days. So when you look at the 40%, it might be somebody offered it to them and they decide they just never want to do it again. Which, by the way, the number one reason that people don't use cannabis, when asked in surveys, both adults and children, is because it's illegal. So what will happen by taking away that argument?
Well, I can tell you that the statistics don't bear out that there is actually an increase in use. How
do we know that when only 2 states have legalized it and it doesn't go into full effect until January? How does it not bear out? How can you even tell by now?
Well, we'll step in there. The 5 minutes is up on that part of the discussion. Now, John, you have a 5-minute rebuttal of some of the things you've heard from Sergeant Grellner, and that starts now.
One of the issues that Sergeant Grellner brought up is that he said that THC levels have increased dramatically over the last 30 years. And that's absolutely true. I said the same thing. I will say that that is not as much of a problem with cannabis as it is with other drugs. The issue when purity rises as being a very detrimental problem occurs when you're talking about something like cocaine or heroin, where it can actually kill you if it becomes too pure. It's a big difference between drinking a beer and drinking pure grain alcohol. One is much more likely to actually kill you. Cannabis, however, THC is pretty much impossible to overdose on. So it's this is actually something that can make it safer because you have to consume less cannabis for the same effect. So instead of, I can speak again firsthand experience. I don't use cannabis now, but I did quite a bit when I was younger. And back then, we smoked a lot of very bad marijuana, and it took a lot of it to get you high. Whereas now, people smoke a very small amount, and it doesn't have the same effect on your lungs. In fact, in states where it's become legal, I was just out in Denver not that long ago, very few people actually smoke marijuana anymore at all. People have moved to vaporizing systems, things that are like e-cigarettes, and so there is harm to the lungs that's caused by combustion, and that's pretty much gone away in states where it's become legalized. I appreciate, Sergeant Grellner, that you have worked a great deal on the front lines of the drug war, and that you've seen a lot of drug addiction. But just being in law enforcement doesn't give you a monopoly on that. I grew up around quite a bit of pretty bad drug addiction where I come from. Pother Bluff for a while when I was growing up was known as the meth capital of the world. I don't know if that was entirely true, but it was a bad problem.
Now you weren't in Jefferson County.
Back in those days, actually, we did have use rates higher, or meth rates higher than Jefferson County. But regardless, it was a bad problem, and I've seen it firsthand. And I will tell you that seeing people get arrested over and over again, that didn't usually help them out of their drug problem. It usually caused them to sink farther into it. And so I do agree that there should be more money available for treatment. That people need to be able to get help if they need it. But treating every single user like an addict, especially when we're talking about marijuana, not every marijuana user is an addict. Not every one of them needs treatment. And treating them that way, I think it's more likely to cause problems because you're taking away their options of being able to lead a successful career, being able to get an education. You take that sort of thing away, then they don't have a whole lot left in their life. Where drug addiction comes from is when you have a blank spot in your life and you're seeking to fill it with something that isn't actually going to work. You're unsuccessfully medicating yourself. And so in these cases, I think that's what happens when you just arrest somebody and you kind of ruin their life. And that's going to cause the drug addiction problem to become worse and not better. Still
no problem.
But I do agree that I think we have a lot of common ground here. We do agree that we all want to live in a society that's safe, that's free, and that kids grow up and make good choices. But I don't think that prohibition is the route forward on that. The simple fact of the matter is that it really hasn't stopped people from using marijuana. And so if you want these things if you want a safer society, I think we need to free up law enforcement resources to concentrate on crimes that really matter, concentrate on violent crimes, property crimes, and to treat cannabis use and people that have problems using cannabis as a health issue, as you suggest, by increasing funding for treatment and allowing people that need help to get it. Thank you.
All right. Sergeant Grellner now has 5 minutes for rebuttal.
Thanks. You know, the fact, beer, grain, alcohol, 1% THC to 20% THC, so it just takes a little less marijuana to get me high. Is there really a time when you can take a hit off of a marijuana cigarette and get high? I mean, I go out to dinner with my wife and have a glass of red wine with a steak, and I'm not intoxicated. I've never heard anybody that said, well, I took a hit off the marijuana and I'm not intoxicated. And when I look through the bill and I see, you know, there's been some mistakes made with alcohol. You know, when the legal drinking age was set at 21 years old, back many, many years ago, we thought that the brain stopped growing at that age. And I noticed a year ago, we're going to legalize it for 21 and older, just like alcohol, when we now know that in adolescence, the brain doesn't come to full functionality until about 25 years old in males and 23 in females. So the problem I have also is there's no science involved. It's just, well, let's just do what we do with alcohol. Let's just do what we do with cigarettes, and we'll just go merrily along. You know, you talked about the arrests of individuals each year for marijuana-related crimes, and it's about 847,000. But just for alcohol-related crimes, and we're not including violence here, we're not talking about spousal abuse, we're not talking about those sorts of things, we're just talking about DWIs, minors in possession. Those arrest rates are 2.8 million a year. So if you're going to free up law enforcement by legalizing it and treating it like alcohol, then we can expect that arrests for for cannabis-related crimes will triple. How's that going to free up time for law enforcement? And again, I go back to all of the regulations that you have drawn into this current law regarding taxation and limits and licensing, and not wanting marijuana in the hands of children, which we're currently working on, and not wanting marijuana coming in from outside states. And I still haven't heard from you how we're going to stop big tobacco from getting involved. And I haven't heard from you yet on how we're going to stop the cartels in the early days of this, which are already battling in Colorado, from owning the places that sell the marijuana, and they're going to funnel not only the money that they make legally in Colorado back to the cartels, but be a safe haven to run their drug money from around the United States and clean it through those companies that they now own in Colorado and Washington State. How we're going to stop any of that from happening. You know, and taxes. Revenues from alcohol tax are $14 billion a year in the United States. $14 billion. Well, we should be able to do a lot of good things with $14 billion. But it costs us $185 billion a year in socioeconomic and medical costs. And we raise $25 billion a year on tobacco, one of the highest tax blocks we have in the United States. And that costs us $200 billion a year. So once again, going back and treating it like alcohol and tobacco and trying to say that it's just like that, and actually it's less harmful than that, and let's just tax it, means that we're going to end up spending more tax dollars. And you look just to Colorado, they haven't even legalized, it doesn't happen until January, just because of the explosion of dispensaries. Yeah, they had a 16% reduction in highway traffic safety deaths last year. So did the whole country. Airbags, side curtain airbags, things that we've been able to do with crumple zones on vehicles help that throughout the country. But 113% increase in people dying in car accidents while on cannabis in Colorado just during medical marijuana expansion. So we can expect that if legalization were to occur, and we have no tests at the current time regarding what is the legal amount to drive a vehicle, or when is the last time my bus driver for my children should have smoked weed? When is the last time the airplane pilot at Lambert St. Louis Airport should have smoked weed? Nobody has the answer to that question. So what we're doing here, what we're trying to do here, is put the cart before the horse, and it's just not going to work. We need to come up with smart solutions that work in the world of alcohol and cigarettes and prescription drug abuse and all of the drugs. And again, I come back to the fact that regulated drugs, such as alcohol and tobacco, kill way more people than the prohibition on all drugs combined together, including marijuana, do each year, at only about 36,000 people compared to over 500,000 people when we go to regulation. Thanks.
A question for both of our panelists. Sergeant Grellner, you touched on this just a little bit now. What about the issue of impaired driving? while people are smoking marijuana, drugged driving. There are clear rules on intoxicated drivers, what the limits are, how would this work for marijuana. John, I'll start with you.
I do think that Sergeant Grellner is correct that the science is somewhat evolving on this issue, but the per se limits that they've enacted in Colorado and Washington, I do think are basically just sort of pulled out of the air. The thing that we are moving those to a state where we are able to test for what are called active THC metabolites, and that can separate out the determine if someone is actually under the influence or if they just have THC still residually in their system. But we have a system for enforcing DUI laws currently, and that is performance-based. So if someone is driving poorly and they get out of the car and they fail a sobriety test, then they can be charged with driving under the influence and convicted. It happens all the time right now. That is how our system currently works. And I don't think we have a huge problem enforcing the laws as they are currently written. And actually, a study by also by Daniel Reeves at the University of Colorado, Denver, looked at the effect of passing medical marijuana laws on traffic deaths, and he found that drunk driving and drug driving deaths actually fell after the passage of medical marijuana laws. And authors mainly attribute that to a substitution effect, where people are drinking less. People who drink, they often go out to bars and then they drive home, whereas people who smoke marijuana typically do that within their own home. And so they actually found that it caused a 9% drop in fatal automobile accidents in medical marijuana states because of this effect. So I think there's a strong argument to be made that it can actually be beneficial and reduce the amount of problems with drug driving by legalizing and regulating cannabis.
Sergeant Grellner.
Legalizing marijuana makes the roads safer. That's what I am trying to wrap my brain around that one. I just told you that, yes, overall death rates dropped from traffic accidents by 16%. But on the flip side of that, those that were still involved went up 113% being involved with THC. We already know that 28% of deaths nationwide on traffic highway safety deaths involve THC and other drugs. And we're going to be led to believe that by growing marijuana in your house and having all sorts of different amounts of marijuana, have licenses for marijuana, which we're going to have to drive to go pick up the marijuana, and we're going to have marijuana cafes where people can smoke outside the public, that we're then going to be able to have safer roadways. I'm trying to figure that one out, but I'm sure it'll come to me. We do not have the testing. He just said it. They pulled a number out of the air in Colorado. So let's legalize it, pull a number out of the air and go with it, and health and safety be damned. We'll just go with it. Really? Is that how we do things in the United States? That's how policy evolves? We'll figure it out later. I think I heard that under one of the acts. I think it was, we got to pass it to see what's in it, right? Well, we'll pass it, and then we'll come up with the rules and regulations. Do you want to be driving down the road next to a guy or a gal that's smoking weed? Oh, okay. I don't know that everybody does.
All right, thank you. Another question for you. There was a survey that just was released in the last day or so. It's an annual survey by the National Institute on Drug Use found that 60% of high school seniors don't think regular pot use is harmful to their health. More than a third of them admitted to using it within the past 12 months. Nearly 7% say they smoke marijuana daily. That's nearly triple what it was 20 years ago. Researchers in this poll say going forward they will explore the link between teens' drug use and states that allow the use of medical marijuana. Some teens report getting their hands on pot from someone else's prescription. I'd like for each of you to respond to that, starting with you, Sergeant Grellner.
That's the, two peer-reviewed studies show already that adolescent pot use is higher in states with medical marijuana. We see this with prescription drug abuse. It is perception of harm. And what medical marijuana, the falsehood of smoked raw cannabis as medicine has done, is led teens to believe it's not harmful, it's safe. If it's medicine, it's good. That's why we have such a problem with opioid pain relievers. It's given to me by a doctor, it comes to a pharmacy, it can't hurt me. They don't know that opium-based narcotics are heroin. In the same way that they now believe, again, use went up when we started seeing states like California and now 17 others follow the falsehood that smoked raw cannabis is medicine. And so their belief system is that, hey, it's safe, it's medicine, it's okay to use. Cigarettes are bad because we spent dollars, a lot of dollars, on preventing that and bringing use rates down. We haven't spent the same dollars. They don't know that if they start using when they're young and continue their use, they're going to lower their IQ by 8 points. 8 points. That's the difference between the 50th percentile and the 30th percentile. And this isn't that I get my IQ points back. I'm going to lead the rest of my life minus 8 IQ points and then try to raise a family that way. That if I have a predisposition for schizophrenia or other mind-altering diseases, long-term use of marijuana can bring on A, early onset, and B, heightened experience of those mental diseases. And we also know that if you start young, because of your underdeveloped brain, that you have a 1 in 6 chance of becoming addicted to the medication. And again, I've heard nothing about what the ideas are, what these nuances are, outside of prohibition that is going to stop youth from using. What new tools that this legislation is going to give me in law enforcement, is going to give prevention, is going to give rehabilitation to stop use. I haven't heard it.
John?
I would say that the tools that it will give you are regulatory tools as opposed to criminal law tools. And so, yeah, it may not be something that you would directly apply, but what we can do when we regulate something is we put it behind the counter, make sure that people are carding for it as opposed to having it be a drug dealer who certainly is not going to card.
So it's safer if it comes from the guy behind the counter than a drug dealer?
Well, actually, yes, it very well could be, because it could be
safer for you.
Well, let me respond.
I
mean, I'm not saying that it's safe for everybody, but it's certainly going to be safer if it's regulated and tested and
like
you know what's
alcohol and tobacco are safer.
Well, they're certainly safer than they were when they were, bootleg moonshine that could be adulterated by Lord knows what.
And you don't have people making moonshine now.
Well, we don't actually. It's a very small part of the market. It is, there's a little bit, but I would appreciate if you'd allow me to respond. But there are problems associated with teen use, but again, it comes back to the fact that cannabis prohibition is absolutely ineffective at keeping it from teenagers. 3 times the rate of use for teenagers than adults. This is not something that can be said as a measure of success for prohibition. I would be interested for Sergeant Grellner to tell us one high school in this state, or this country even, where prohibition has resulted in the eradication of cannabis use. I think you couldn't find a single one. Now, that being the case, how can you say that this policy is successful? Now, are you ever going to eliminate it? I don't think that's possible. But I do think that what we can do is we can remove the availability by getting rid of the black market and bringing it under a regulated system where, yes, you do card people, you do ask for ID, and for medical marijuana patients, there's prescriptions, and they're regulated. And yeah, it's never going to be a perfect system, but you have a lot more control over it than you do now. Yes, there are prescription drugs that are abused, but you know what? It's not as easy as going buying a bag of pot off the street corner. I live in a not so great area of St. Louis, and you can walk down the street corner and buy pretty much any illicit drug that you like right there without any pharmacy prescription, anything of that nature. So what you're talking about is a completely unregulated system that anyone of any age has access to. I fail to see how almost any system might be an improvement upon it.
Really, because we're already preventing 79%, so we're talking about 21%. And you stated that you live in a not-so-nice area of St. Louis. When we do interviews, news interviews, I haven't seen a single person in a low-income socioeconomic area of St. Louis or East St. Louis say, my life would be made better if we legalized drugs around here. What they say is we want these drug dealers off our streets and out of our neighborhoods and gone from this area, and we want you to fight drug abuse, is what they tell me. And that's what they tell the news crews. So, and we keep shying away from the fact that people are going to grow marijuana in their house all year long. So exactly how do I keep my kid from spending the night at a buddy's house and his mom and dad are growing weed in the house and they have marijuana brownies and marijuana cookies and marijuana candies? How do I keep my kid from hanging out there and eating any of those, not knowing that they're not just regular? Because mom and dad aren't home to tell you. You know, we've already seen in Colorado where we've got kids under the age of 5 showing up in emergency rooms after eating marijuana-laced chocolate, marijuana-laced cookies, marijuana-laced candies, that they had no idea under the age of 5 what marijuana is.
May I recommend that to keep your kids from doing that, you can be involved in their lives and talk to them. The most powerful predictor of if a kid's going to use drugs is if their parents are involved in their lives and if they are educating them with good information about it. So that is the key thing. It really ultimately doesn't come down to laws mostly at all. Mostly it comes down to having the parents involved in their children's lives.
It comes down to educating is what it comes down to.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. And we have one more question and then we're going to go to some of the questions from the audience. John, this question is for you. Expands a little bit upon what you said last night. What if, when you start doing your polls on what Missourians want, what if at that time you hear more that Missourians would be more in favor of legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes instead of recreation? How will you approach that? And then I would like for Sergeant Grellner to expand upon that. What if that is the approach? As we are sitting here tonight, and as you said last night, it's now time to start talking and discussing the issue. What would your response be?
You know, we would certainly explore it, but I will say that, the polling that we've seen so far on that issue is there's not a whole lot greater support, at least in the state of Missouri, for a medical marijuana bill than for a full-on legalized tax on regulated bill. And I think there's very broad support for medical marijuana as a general proposition. Most people think that it has medical properties that should be used, and they're absolutely right on that. However, I think some of the medical marijuana states, California most explicitly, have kind of set a bad example to the other states because their medical marijuana system is really unregulated. So I think that there are problems with some of the medical marijuana models. I think Colorado's, Washington's have been better, so California has, I think, kind of planted a seed in people's minds that what medical marijuana means is an unregulated market where dispensaries can just pop up anywhere. And so, I think that's why people are even more likely to support a full-on regulation and taxation bill than the medical marijuana model. But if the polling shows something different, we would certainly take that into consideration. I think that's a question that can only be answered by, this is a democratic system, so we can only do what people want us to do. So we'll have to look at that information and make a decision at that time.
Sergeant Grellner?
Medical marijuana, and as he's shown, as he just said, is correct. It's completely unregulated in California. It became completely unregulated in 2009 in Colorado when dispensaries showed up all over the place and people with medical marijuana cards went from 8,000 to 108,000 in 1 year's time. When you look at who a medical marijuana user is, he's a white male between the ages of 25 and 35 years old. He has no known medical condition or disease. He has a background in history and criminal activity and shows signs of disease and addiction. That's what 90% or more of the users of medical marijuana in Colorado and California look like.
May I inquire as the source of that statistic?
Yeah, I don't believe that.
You know,
I work
I'll email it to you. How about that?
Okay.
When you hear about people in California that are getting marijuana for athlete's foot, when undercover officers are buying marijuana from dispensaries because their butt itches, I think it may be an unregulated market. And that the fallacy is that we've brought medical marijuana forward without using the FDA procedure that we should. There are already 3 FDA-approved marijuana medications on the market that can be dispensed by doctors. There are 3 more in final round testing. And there's testing that goes on every year. Although it's a Schedule 1 drug, you can get permits, and many do, to look at it. When you look at this, why are we in the space that we are with the synthetic cannabinoids? It's because of research into the medical usefulness of marijuana that explored all these cannabinoids, which, by the way, goes back to drug driving. We talk about one chemical in marijuana right now. We talk about THC. There are over 200 different cannabinoids and 400 different chemicals in marijuana. That's not the same as alcohol. When we talk about alcohol and drunk driving, we're talking about ethanol intoxication. There are many cannabinoids in marijuana that are like THC chemically or like THC physiologically, but aren't THC. They can also have effects. So if you're measuring just for one metabolite, then you're missing a whole host of others. And again, there has been no other medication in the United States that we have done through referendum. There's a reason we have the FDA. And it's because they need to look at drugs, make sure that they're safe, make sure that the dosage is right by weight for the individual, the synergistic effects of that drug with other drugs, and a whole host of other things. Make sure that manufacturing is proper and that you're getting the pure drug and not something that somebody just grew in their living room.
All right, Sergeant Grellner, thank you. We're going to spend the last half hour asking some of the questions that you put on these cards. I have equal number for both of our panelists. This one is for John. Explain how the drug cartels were created by Prohibition.
Well, pretty simple. When you create a black market, it creates an incentive for people to get involved in it and to sell a product that is illegal. And that selects for people that are not necessarily the same people that would have been involved in the industry beforehand. And it selects for a criminal element. So just as we had Al Capone during Prohibition, he came to power because they shuttered all the thousands of breweries that were in this country. You didn't have Anheuser-Busch and Schlafly and Miller anymore. You had Al Capone and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. That's the sort of thing that you got with alcohol prohibition. And that's exactly what it's given us with marijuana prohibition. And the Mexican cartels are just the latest instantiation of that. But the Sinaloa cartels and La Familia have killed 60,000 people in northern Mexico over the last 7 years. And their profits are derived 20 to 60%, depending on who you ask, from illegal cannabis sales. Now, if you want to get rid of them, yeah, you can take it out of the illicit market. And are they going to try to get involved in the legal market? Probably, but you can then, arrest them, and they have to be out. If you're operating in a legal market, you have to be out in the open and have people that sign licenses and apply for things. It's going to be a lot easier to enforce laws against racketeering if a business is out in the open than if it's operating illicitly underground. I mean, no one knows exactly the size of the marijuana market right now, or exactly where all the money goes, simply because of the fact that it's illegal. Legalization will allow us to know what's going on in the market, track the money, track the product, as opposed to simply just handing it over to people that are putting bodies strewn across northern Mexico.
All right, this next question is for Sergeant Grellner. Do you believe that alcohol should be prohibited? Please explain your answer in light of the fact that alcohol is objectively more harmful than cannabis.
Objectively more harmful than cannabis. I disagree with objectively more harmful, but do I think we should, that prohibition of alcohol will work at this time? No, I don't think prohibition of alcohol will work at this time because it's ingrained in our social issues. It's a part of what we do after work. In some cases, it's what we do at birthday parties. In some cases, it's what people do. But that's because prohibition, because we can't back up alcohol, we can't back up cigarettes, to say that we should then promote cannabis so that it gets to the same point is ludicrous. If I came forward today and said that I have a product that people are going to love and they're going to want, and it's going to kill 440,000 Americans a year, would I be able to sell cigarettes today if I brought that forward today? If I told you that we'd never seen alcohol before and I brought it before you and said it's going to kill 80,000 Americans and do a ton of harm to our society, would we allow alcohol today? Those are already out of the gate. We need to work on them. We definitely need to work on them. We need to bring those death rates down. We're losing too many Americans to alcohol and too many to tobacco. But that doesn't mean we need to add another one to it so that we lose more Americans and we degrade health in the United States and safety in the United States even more. We need to work on those together to bring those down as far as we possibly can and continue to work the prohibition side of these other drugs and bring their rates down at the same time through prevention, smart enforcement, and rehabilitation.
What is your definition for out of the gate? You know, because 19 million Americans use cannabis regularly now. I think that's kind of out of the gate.
Well, how many Americans use alcohol, John? I don't know.
It is a lot. It's 60%, I think, use it regularly.
Okay, 60%. So how many millions of Americans at 311 million? That's about what?
160.
170 million Americans.
Yes, it's a lot, but
it's a lot.
But you know, prohibition only decreased use by maybe 10%.
So we should unprohibit this so that it matches that. That's the craziest argument I can. You keep making my point. You keep making my point. Alcohol and tobacco, and I'm telling you what we need to work on is bringing alcohol and tobacco down to cannabis.
You assume that the functions of these things are additive, when in fact they are actually substitutes. Pretty much every bit of research shows that people will substitute cannabis for alcohol and vice versa. So if you
let me tell you from the guy that works the street, we call them poly drug users because they smoke marijuana, drink alcohol, and lead to other drug use, and they do them all at the same time, synergistically, all the time.
Yeah, that is a very, very small segment of the population who uses cannabis.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Don't worry.
I mean, poly drug users account for maybe a couple million people. Users of cannabis total account for about 19 million people. So you are talking about a fairly small segment here.
All right, I have a
right,
question.
we want to keep that segment small, is what I'm letting you know.
But I have a question for John now. If marijuana is legalized, how will you protect youth? What policies will you put in place before legislation to ensure those under the age of 21 do not have access to marijuana?
I think there's a number of things. Obviously, an age at which there's a cutoff where you cannot obtain legally under that, and so I think that's most important. But also, you do need regulations on. I think marketing is an important thing to regulate. One of the reasons that the tobacco industry has been unable to acquire new users among young people is because the marketing is regulated. And so you don't see cigarette advertising on television anymore, you don't hear it on the radio, and so I think we could do something similar with cannabis because it does present unique harms to young people.
Because I see all the advertising for cannabis now on television.
Well, you know, just because it's not advertised now doesn't mean that it's not being promoted. It's being promoted by their people's friends at school because
which is the same way cigarettes are being promoted now.
Well, the people that are promoting now have a direct financial interest in selling kids because they are.
Big tobacco won't get involved in cannabis at all.
Would you rather be big tobacco or the Sinaloa cartel? I mean,
the Sinaloa cartel is going to go away because marijuana gets legalized, so they're going to quit selling cocaine, they're going to quit selling methamphetamine, they're going to quit selling heroin, they're going to quit all of their other businesses.
Let me ask you this: if I took a 25% chunk of the Franklin County Sheriff's Department's budget and eliminated it, would you have to make some cutbacks?
Really, because what they saw in California which was basically legalized recreation. Trying to answer the question. They saw a 2.2 to 4%.
It was actually my question. That's I think the issue really.
2 to 4% decrease in funding to cartels in California with their liberal use of medical marijuana.
Well, California is not all the nation, so yeah, it's going to be 2 to 4% hit to the cartels, but if you legalize it entirely across the board, you'd be talking about 20% at minimum. That's what the RAM study found. Government statistics have been saying about 60%. But back to the question at hand, I do think that regulating the advertising is an important function function that would keep it from being promoted to kids, and also heavily enforcing that 21 age, so that you're having people go in and do what we do now with alcohol and tobacco, where people try to buy alcohol underage and then they yank those people's licenses. Drug dealers don't have licenses that can be taken up. They don't put up a bond to sell their product. They can pretty much just lose, the businesses would stand to lose something, whereas drug dealers currently do not.
Well, you gotta quit. You have got to stop comparing marijuana to alcohol, because right now Missouri 30-day use of alcohol is 16.9% and marijuana is 8.6%, and you're right, we have all of that in place. They're not allowed to market to kids with alcohol. You have to be carded and be over the age of 21, and we have teams throughout the state that stand outside liquor stores and gas stations and card people and try to stop people from buying for kids all the time. So you haven't come up with anything new. You want us to use, again, you keep making my point for me, we're going to use the same thing we use on alcohol, folks, and it's not going to get any worse, even though 2 times the number of kids use alcohol than use cannabis at the current time. And we don't even have any marketing on TV about cannabis at all. And under your regulations, we are going to have it, but we're not going to market to kids.
Well, alcohol is actually used at a similar rate to cannabis among teenagers, and that's from the Monitoring the Future survey. You have about 40% use rate on both sides of that.
Again, you're looking at lifetime. You're not looking at 30-day. Lifetime is people that include people who just tried it once and never went back to it. The 30-day survey gives you a better look at who's using right now.
This is your question, John, so I'll let you finish up the answer on this and we'll move on to the next one.
I think I gave that.
Yeah, okay, all right, you're good with that. All right, our next question is for Sergeant Grellner. Do you think that a sentence of life without parole is justified in a marijuana case?
Well, here's the deal. It wasn't, so I guess we're talking about the case that John brought up earlier, the man today. First off, we don't know any of the facts about the case. John didn't give us any of the facts other than he was a Class X offender. Means he had multiple felony convictions prior to getting that sentence. We weren't there. None of us were. None of us were involved in that case. It was 1991. It wasn't 2013. We don't know the factors surrounding who this individual was, what he had done throughout Pettis County, how many times he had seen the same judge, how many other opportunities and plea bargains he had been involved in. We don't have his criminal history to see what charges he had been arrested for and never convicted of, or never pressed through because he was given probation, or SESs or SISs, which he walked down.
I can provide that information to you if you'd like. In fact, it's in the Riverfront Times from the last week. The offenses were, one of them was a distribution charge of under 35 grams. One was a possession of over 35 grams. And then the final one was the conspiracy charge.
And those were the charges he was convicted of, but you don't have his arrest record. You don't know all the things he was arrested for, because I can tell you this.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, because I can tell you when we look at criminal history reports that go forward, individuals get arrested for 17, 18, 19, 20 felonies and may be only convicted of 1 or 2 because things are plea bargained, they act as witnesses in the cases and charges are dropped, or they may be sentenced, or they may be arrested for 5 charges and the prosecutor doesn't want to pile on, so they charge them with the least charge that they can, or 1 of the 5 charges, and go forward with that charge. So, again, we don't know. Do I think that the guy walked, and here's the other thing about that. 1/10 of 1% of all people in prison across the United States are there for possession of marijuana. Less than 1/10 of 1%. We're not incarcerating people for having a joint in their pocket. And we're not putting, besides this one individual, name somebody else that's doing life as a Class X offender for marijuana.
You're correct. That is.
So this is an oddity we're talking about, not the normality that we're talking about.
It is an oddity, but an injustice is still an injustice.
You call it injustice. When you weren't part of the investigation, you weren't a part of the jury, you weren't a part of the defense team, and you weren't there at the time that it happened. So to call it an injustice based on what you now know, 20-some-odd years later, is doing a disservice to those that were involved in it at the time that it truly happened, and you weren't there. It's like people asking about crimes all the time that they see on TV when they weren't there and they don't understand it. That's a big part of what happens with law enforcement. So you're talking about one oddity, and if you think an injustice was served, then work on that one oddity. Don't make the rest of civilization pay for it, because you want to talk about failed policies. If you want to get to prison, federal prison in the United States at the current time, the fastest and easiest way is 43% of people going to federal prison last year were from illegal immigration. So if that's a failed policy, then I guess we should do away with border security and immigration acts, and we'll just solve that problem for everybody. That's why we're not filling the federal prisons with illegal immigrants anymore, because we just won't have illegal immigrants. The theory that we can fix a problem by legalizing it because we can't control the crime is not the answer.
Well, federal prison is not where most people are confined, and in fact, with cannabis, it's usually state or it's usually local jails. And so, yes, there are actually a lot of people serving time right now for simple possession. They don't get sentenced to long prison terms. That's absolutely true. But there are plenty of people that are out there serving, a month, a week, a day in jail for possession of marijuana, and that's also actually more expensive than actual prison. We have to pay substantially more for prison or for local jails because they're not really equipped to house people for long periods of time.
And again, those arrests may lead people to rehabilitation more often than not.
All right, we're going to proceed with another question. This one is for John. What is the argument to keep meth, heroin, cocaine, etc. from being legalized once we begin down the road of legalizing illegal drugs?
I would say that it's, those drugs are dramatically more harmful. And that is, Sergeant Grellner sort of laughed off the objectively less harmful criteria about marijuana earlier, but they actually did a study in the Lancet, which is sort of like the Journal of American Medicine over in Britain. It's probably the most respected medical journal over there. And they looked at the various arms of different drugs and rated them on a scale of 0 to 100. And now this is not the final word on this by any means, but alcohol clocked in at 72, tobacco 26, methamphetamine 33, crack cocaine 54, and cannabis was 20. And so, I think it's pretty obvious that cannabis is not as harmful as heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamine. So I think there is an obvious case there for treating them differently. And I think that the case can easily be made that it should be treated more like the currently legal substances.
Again, you make my point, but we won't go back into that again, because the currently legal substances are killing more Americans than those that we have under prohibition at the current time. So it makes absolutely no sense.
But then if prohibition works, then you can control those substances through prohibition. And I think we've seen what that brings us. We tried alcohol prohibition, and it was pretty obviously a massive failure.
So did drinking go down? Did drinking rates go down during prohibition, John?
Drinking rates decreased somewhat, but mainly you were talking about the drinkers, social drinkers went down. You didn't really deter the long-term alcoholics, and you had a lot of... those that are succumbing to the disease of alcoholism, we didn't deter them because we needed to put them into jail and find them a way into rehabilitation and get them to sober living. Well, that did not happen under alcohol prohibition.
How long ago was that?
That was 70 years ago.
70 years ago.
But,
so has rehabilitation come maybe a long way since 70 years ago?
Perhaps so, but the point is that the policy didn't work then. I don't know that you have good reason to believe that it's going to work now, especially...
And again, I said I don't think you can put prohibition in place at the current time because that cattle is far out of the barn, but we still need to work on that problem, and what we don't need to do is add cannabis as another problem to it.
John, I'll let you have the last word on this because it was your question.
Okay, I absolutely agree we have to work on the problem associated with all these drugs, but we would be better able to do that under a legal regulated market. That is what we've been able to do with alcohol and tobacco. The harms of those have been declining for the last 30 years. Fewer drunk driving deaths, lower use rates, lower teen use rates. The new Monitoring the Future survey came out. Alcohol and tobacco use rates fell again. So this is something that is an ongoing trend, and I think it's something that we can repeat with cannabis.
All right, a question for Sergeant Grellner. What are the statistics of marijuana leading to further, more dangerous narcotics?
I don't know that there are confirmed further statistics. Everybody likes to debate, is it a gateway drug? Well, what I can tell you is when we talk to individuals that are in our drug court programs, in our jails, when we've done surveys, and we talk about first use. What is the drug of first use in middle school and high school? Number one and number two, swapping back and forth, are alcohol and marijuana. So, can I say that every person that smokes marijuana in the 8th grade and goes on to be a heroin addict, that would be ludicrous and stupid, okay? But can I say that a large percentage of individuals that do go on to use heroin and methamphetamine and cocaine started their use with marijuana? You bet I can. And so, is there a link and a causality there? I'm sure that there is.
The science would beg to disagree with you on that.
The science would beg to disagree.
Well,
that people that use heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, LSD, PCP never touched marijuana. They just jumped right to those drugs. Right
no. But the question is there a causal link?
And what did I say, John? I said that we couldn't show a complete causal link because there are individuals that can smoke marijuana and only marijuana. Those individuals can drink alcohol and only alcohol.
But you said
there are a lot of them.
You said you betted that it was there. You said you thought it was there.
I said that when you look at people whose disease state includes hard drugs like cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and LSD, and other hard drugs, marijuana is at the very beginning of that.
Well, what the research has shown is that it's not, there's no causal link between marijuana use. It's, what's happening is people that have a propensity to use all sorts of things, try marijuana, and they try other substances.
So how do we fix those people, Jim?
That is a good question. But what you're talking about then is the people, not the substances. And I think that's really where the problem usually lies.
Yes.
The problem with addiction is a personal problem. It's not a problem of specific substance.
Exactly. And I agree with that statement, except for the fact that when you allow the perception of harm of any product to come down, people will use more because they think it's safer. So it's a two-part problem. Yes, some people have a predisposition to the disease of addiction, but when you allow easy access to drugs, you're giving them ease of access to what's going to further their disease.
Well, I certainly don't think we want to say that anything that's legal is a good idea. There are plenty of legal things that are really, really terrible ideas. But I think what we should do is put out accurate educational information and let people make decisions as informed adults about those things.
Yes.
You had the last word. That was your question.
I kind of thought that's what we were doing.
Gotcha. Okay. This next question is for John. If legalized, what would you do with people already incarcerated for cannabis-related charges?
If a person has no other sort of offenses, then my preference would be to release them and have their records expunged. I don't think that we should be punishing people. It is punishment for the rest of your life. There are a few offenses that can be expunged. Minor in possession of alcohol, I think that makes sense. You don't want to have a young person paying a price for something dumb that they did when they were young. And DUI, I'm not really sure why that's expungible, but it is. But right now, if you're caught with a small amount of marijuana, then that goes on your record for the rest of your life, and you are going to be asked when you go to apply for a job, do you have any convictions? If you say yes, then you're probably going to be passed over for other applicants. And this is a punishment that I don't think it serves anybody. I think we want these people to get back to being fully functional members of society, not carrying a lodestone around their neck for the rest of their lives. So I think that's really
clean up their life and live sober for 5 years, free and clear of methamphetamine. Cannabis is the one that's holding us all back.
Well, I would say, if a person had a drug addiction problem, and this is not the official ShowMeCannabis position because we only talk about marijuana, but certainly I I would think that if a person has cleaned up their life, you would want to let them have the opportunity to get back as a fully functional member of society. I don't see, you say it's a sickness. If you think it's a sickness, then why would you mark that person for life after they found the cure?
Because at this point in time, society demands it because we have laws and regulations because we believe people will adhere to them. And when they don't, they pay the price for it. And the price in this instance is that you have done this crime, and there's no way out of saying I didn't do this crime. And there are plenty of individuals who have criminal convictions for drugs that go on to do great things. If you've not read the book Fearless about the U.S. Green Beret, who out of high school started smoking marijuana through a girlfriend, which led him down the road of crack cocaine, and then became, through rehabilitation into the Army, one of the most decorated officers in the history of the Army after overcoming his decoration. There's ways around it.
There are ways around it, but I don't know why you want to throw more roadblocks in front of that person. That's all I'm saying.
Put your life on the line.
Roadblocks up. I wasn't the one that got caught doing the crime.
Is it a crime or is it a sickness?
All right, John, we'll let that go. We're going to have one last question. So each panelist had 4 questions. Make sure it's completely fair. The last one to Sergeant Grellner. Why does marijuana cause long-term users to become paranoid, sometimes experiencing psychosis when they smoke it?
Well, that's a great question to answer. And that's part of the science that we're just now starting to develop. When we look, and it comes from early use. We know that for certain. The studies that are now out show that kids that start smoking marijuana, especially if they have a predisposition already in their brain for I'm stumbling here all of a sudden. If they have a predisposition for schizophrenia, they have a predisposition for depression, that early onset comes from marijuana use, and that the disease state can be heightened. But we don't know exactly, because the studies aren't there, what that does to adults who either have a predisposition or are dealing with it. There have been some studies that looked at schizophrenia and people who have just have schizophrenia and they smoke marijuana while having schizophrenia, and they looked at short-term memory problems and long-term memory problems. But when you look at youth who use, and you see what it does in collapsing the brain in the same area that schizophrenia collapsed the brain, we know that there's a causal link there. We don't know exactly what it is. And so that's why it's so important that we don't see increases in youth use match alcohol. We see decreases in alcohol use that match cannabis, and then we lower everything.
Most of these studies are looking at people that are, as you said, it comes from early use, and it's early, very heavy use, and I do agree that that's a problem. I don't think that's basically the equivalent. Most of them are looking at people that are using every day from the age of about 13 a lot of the time. And so that's sort of like saying, there are problems associated with drinking a pint of whiskey every day as a 13-year-old. Yes, there are many, many problems associated with that.
So a pint of whiskey equals a joint.
That's not necessarily what I'm saying.
Well,
but my point is that there are problems. Early use for any substance does things to the brain that wouldn't happen when they're more mature. And so, yeah, that's definitely a problem. And so what we need to do, again, I think, is reach out to kids with very accurate, factual information about this. And, when I was getting drug education, a lot of it was sort of based around scare tactics. What I think we need to do is target it with this sort of information that, look, this is something that really could do some damage to you. And that said, this is a relatively small risk, considering that schizophrenia is, not very common. You're talking about a risk that's about 1 in 1,000, and even if the causal link is there, which some of the research does dispute, you're talking about maybe doubling a risk that's 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 500. That's bad. We should certainly combat it, but it's not, not nearly every single person who smokes a joint is going to become schizophrenic.
No, that's not what I said.
Until
that point, I was about to agree with you. We're going to end on agreement, but you're right, and he hit on the perfect point, and that is that we need to get the information, we need to get money into prevention, And we need to talk to kids about it. And we need to make sure that, because scare tactics don't work, we need to make sure that kids understand that use is going to harm them. But it doesn't just harm the youth, it harms all users.
All right, we're going to end it on that note. John, Jason, thank you.